Kicked out at 15, he bought an abandoned spaceship for 50 cents. See what it turned into. The night my stepfather threw me out, the temperature on Callisto Station had dropped to -12 inside the lower docking corridors. Not outside. Inside. The heating units in Ring 9 had been broken for 3 weeks, and nobody who mattered enough to fix them had bothered. That told you everything you needed to know about Ring 9. It was the kind of place where nobody mattered enough. I had a duffel bag with 2 changes of clothes, a cracked multi-tool I had pulled from a recycling bin 6 months earlier, and 11 Federation credits. My name is Marcus Vane. I was 15 years old. I had nowhere to go, and I was not going to cry about it. I had already decided that before the door sealed behind me. The docking corridors of Ring 9 ran for about 4 kilometers, in a loose oval around the underside of Callisto Station. Most of the bays along that oval were empty. The ones that were not empty held ships that barely qualified as ships anymore. Hulls with missing panels, engines pulled out for parts, cargo frames bent out of shape by rough landings nobody had ever fixed. The whole place smelled like burned coolant and old rust, and the particular kind of grease that builds up over decades on metal that nobody cleans. I walked for about 20 minutes before I found a gap between 2 fuel compressors wide enough to crawl into. It was warmer there. The compressors ran warm even when they were not actively cycling, and the gap trapped the heat. I pulled my knees up to my chest, leaned my back against the metal, and looked at the ceiling of the corridor above me. It was stained brown from old coolant leaks. Somebody had scratched something into the metal up there a long time ago. I could not read it from where I was sitting. I did not sleep much that first night. I ate half of a protein bar I found at the bottom of my bag, drank water from a pressure tap on the wall, and thought about what I was going to do. The answer I kept coming back to was simple. I needed somewhere to be. Not just to sleep. Somewhere that was mine. Somewhere with walls and a door I could close. The next morning, I started walking the ring. I had nothing else to do. I had no school to go to, no job to show up at, no family left on the station who wanted to see me. So I walked. I looked at every bay, every piece of scrap, every forgotten corner of that corridor. I was looking for something I could not fully name yet. I just knew I would recognize it when I saw it. I found it in Bay 47. It did not look like much. It looked like a piece of trash that had been sitting in a docking bay for so long that the station had simply forgotten it was there. The hull was a dull, grayish-brown color that might have once been silver or white, but decades of dust and chemical buildup had taken care of that. It was bigger than I expected from the outside, maybe 30 meters long, with a rounded nose section and a wide cargo belly that sagged slightly toward the deck. 2 of the 4 landing struts had collapsed, so the whole ship tilted forward and to the left, like a dog with a broken leg trying to stay upright. There were holes in the hull. Small ones mostly, but enough that I could see strips of the interior when I walked around the outside and shone my multi-tool's light through them. Wires hung loose in there. Panels had fallen from the walls. It was dark inside, and it smelled like something had been living in it a long time ago and then stopped. There was a sign on the bay door, old, printed on cheap plastic that had gone brittle and cracked at the corners. It said the vessel was listed as non-salvageable scrap, pending clearance, with a registry number I did not bother copying down. Under the registry number was a price. The station would transfer legal ownership to anyone willing to take responsibility for the disposal fees. The price was half a Federation credit. I stood there for a long time looking at that sign. I had 11 credits. Half a credit was nothing. The disposal fees it mentioned were probably more than I had, but that word, ownership, kept pulling at something in my chest. Legal ownership, a thing that was mine, with walls and a door. I found the Bay Authority office 40 minutes later. It was a small room near the main ring junction, staffed by a man named Gerald, who was somewhere between 50 and 70 years old, and appeared to be asleep sitting up when I walked in. He had a gray beard, and the particular kind of permanently annoyed expression that comes from spending too many years doing a job you stopped caring about long ago. I told him I wanted to buy the derelict in Bay 47. He looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked behind me, as if he expected someone older to be standing there. Then he looked back at me. "You're serious," he said. "Yes," I said. "Kid, the disposal fees on that heap are going to run you about 400 credits. once we get a crew in to cut it apart and haul the material. The sign says half a credit for ownership transfer. Yeah, and then you own a broken ship you're legally responsible for disposing of. I understand that, I said. I want to buy it. He stared at me for another few seconds. Then he made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite a sigh, and pulled up a screen on his desk. You got ID? I showed him my station ID card. He looked at it. He looked at me. He shrugged with his whole body, the way people do, when they have decided that something is not their problem. Half a credit, he said. I paid him. He printed a document on paper, actual paper, which felt strange in my hands, and stamped it with an old mechanical stamp that left a smudged blue circle on the corner. He handed it to me. She's yours, he said. Good luck. He did not sound like he thought luck was going to help. I went back to Bay 47, and I stood in front of the ship for a while, holding my ownership paper. Then I found the access hatch on the starboard side, which was hanging open about 15 centimeters, because the seal had failed and the hatch had shifted in its frame. I pulled it the rest of the way open and climbed inside. It was worse on the inside than it looked from outside. The floor panels in the main corridor were buckled, several of them completely missing, leaving gaps down to the structural supports below. The walls had once had some kind of light paneling installed, a creamy white material, but most of it had fallen or been stripped away, leaving bare metal underneath. The air tasted stale and cold. My breath made small clouds. I moved carefully, testing each floor panel before I put my full weight on it. I went through the main corridor, past what had been a crew quarters section, 4 small bunks, all stripped, one of the wall sections completely caved in from what looked like an old impact, and into the cockpit at the front. The cockpit was in better shape than the rest of the ship. The viewport was intact, though fogged with age. The pilot's seat was still there, cracked along the back but structurally solid. The control panels were dark, every screen dead. Wires dangled from the ceiling where equipment had been removed. But in the center of the cockpit's rear wall, mounted in a housing that looked like nothing else on the ship, smooth, unbroken, made of a slightly iridescent material that seemed to shift color when the light hit it differently, was a unit I did not recognize. It was roughly the size of a large storage box. It had no screens, no visible controls, no ports that matched anything in my experience. It looked completely out of place, like someone had put a piece of fine jewelry inside a landfill. I crouched in front of it and shone my multi-tool light across its surface. There were markings on it, not damage, but intentional marks, characters in a script I did not know, and in the center of the housing, barely visible, there was a faint, slow pulse of light, amber, dim as a dying ember, but there, something inside it was still running. I spent the next 2 days cleaning the cockpit. I found a broom in an equipment locker near the main airlock, old, bristles half gone, but functional, and I swept out a decade worth of grit and debris. I used rags torn from an old work shirt I had in my bag to wipe down the surfaces. I fixed the hatch seal using a tube of sealant I found in the same locker, heating it with my multi-tool to make it malleable, pressing it into the gap until the hatch held closed properly. I slept in the pilot's seat. It was not comfortable. It was far better than the gap between the fuel compressors. On the 3rd day, the amber light in the strange housing pulsed differently. Twice, fast, then a pause, then 3 times slow. I was eating a piece of dry bread I had traded 2 credits for at one of the corridor food vendors, and I stopped chewing and stared at it. I said, out loud, feeling slightly ridiculous, "Hello." What happened next was not a voice, exactly. It was more like a sound that wanted to become a voice, a tone that shifted and wavered and arranged itself gradually into something that had the rhythm of speech before it had the clarity of words. It filled the cockpit, low and resonant, and I felt it more in my chest than I heard it with my ears. Then, slowly, haltingly, in a standard Federation language that was clearly being reconstructed from a very deep and very old memory, it said, "You are still here." I swallowed my bread. "Yes," I said. There was a pause that lasted almost 30 seconds. Others came before. None stayed. "I bought the ship," I said. "It's mine now." Another long pause. The amber light pulsed irregularly, like a heartbeat that had forgotten its own rhythm. Bought, it repeated. The word sounded like it was being tasted. For what? Value. Half a credit, I said. The pause this time was shorter. And I would have sworn, though I had no basis for it, that what came next was something like disbelief, filtered through a mind that processed disbelief very differently from humans. Half a credit. It was all the ship was worth to them, I said. Yes, it said. I know. I learned over the following days that the unit in the rear wall of the cockpit was a thinking core, a navigational and operational intelligence built by a species called the Keth, who I had heard of only vaguely, an old species, one of the founding members of the Federation, known as architects and engineers. The intelligence had been installed in this ship, which it called the Unyielding Meridian, approximately 63 years before I crawled through that hatch. The ship had changed hands many times. Each new owner had stripped something away: the engines, the drive core, the life support units, the cargo systems, the secondary power cells. Each new owner had taken what they could sell and left what they could not. The thinking core could not be removed without destroying it, and a destroyed thinking core was worthless, so it had stayed. It had stayed, and grown quieter and dimmer as the years passed. Running on residual power from a single backup cell that had been designed to last a century, watching the bay through sensors that flickered on and off, waiting. For what? It could not say. It had stopped expecting anything after the first 20 years. I told it my name. It did not have a name by human standards. Thinking cores were identified by registry codes, but it had always processed the ship's name as something like its own identity. I started calling it Meridian. The first time I used the name, the amber light pulsed steadily for almost a minute, as if something had settled. I asked Meridian what the ship needed. The list was extensive: engines, a drive core, life support systems, power generation, navigational arrays, hull repairs in at least 6 locations, basic crew systems, waste processing. And the cockpit systems? I asked. Functional, Meridian said, with a clarity that was improving every day as it found its language again. The interface panels work. There is nothing to interface with. But the cockpit itself has power from my backup cell. For how long? With current consumption, 41 years. Good, I said. That gives us some time. Meridian was quiet for a moment. Then it said, and this time the words were clear, unmistakably clear. You are planning to restore this ship. Yes, I said. You are 15 years old, alone, with no resources and no technical training. Yes, I said. That is not a reasonable plan. I know, I said. I'm doing it anyway. I had very little to start with. 11 credits, minus half for the ship, minus 2 for the bread, left me with 8.5. I needed money, which meant I needed work. The next morning, I went to every bay along the ring and asked if anyone needed help. Most people turned me away. 2 said yes. The first job was cleaning. A cargo operator 2 bays down had a ship that had carried chemical fertilizer on its last run, and the smell had soaked into the cargo hold walls. He needed it scrubbed. He paid me 1.5 credits for 4 hours of work that left my hands raw and my eyes watering. The second job was better. A Valorian merchant, tall, gray-blue skinned, with the slow, deliberate movements of a species that lived twice as long as humans, had a cargo crane that kept locking up midway through its extension cycle. I had never worked on a Valorian crane before. I had never worked on any crane before. But I had my multi-tool and I had time, and I spent 3 hours tracing the problem through the crane's mechanical system, until I found a sensor that was reading the extension position incorrectly, causing the safety lock to trigger early. I recalibrated the sensor, using a procedure I mostly invented on the spot. The crane worked. The merchant looked at me for a long moment with eyes that were a deep, steady gold. "You have done this before?" he asked. "No," I said. He paid me 3 credits. Then he looked at me again, as if he was trying to decide something. "You are living on this ring?" he asked. "Bay 47, I said. "I own the derelict there." He said nothing else. But 2 days later, a small crate appeared at the mouth of Bay 47, containing a box of food rations, a thermal blanket, and a basic electronics repair kit. There was no note. I knew who had left it. Over the next weeks, I built a routine. I worked every job I could find, for every credit I could earn. I ate simply. I slept in the pilot's seat, which I padded with the thermal blanket. Every credit I did not spend on food I saved. Every evening, I spent in the cockpit with Meridian, learning. Meridian was the best teacher I had ever had, partly because it was patient in a way no human teacher had ever been with me, and partly because it taught only things that were directly useful. It explained how propulsion systems worked, the principles behind them, the physics, the engineering logic. It explained power generation, life support, structural integrity. It explained the difference between how human ships were built and how Keth ships were built, and the differences were fascinating. Keth engineering was layered and redundant, and almost organic in its logic, while human engineering tended toward straightforward efficiency. Both approaches had advantages. Both had weaknesses. I asked Meridian once why it was teaching me. It said, "Because you are still here." I said, "That's not much of a reason." It said, "For 63 years I have watched things begin and end in this bay. Owners who came and stripped what they could and left. Ships passing in the corridor outside. Conversations I could partially hear but not join. I have had a great deal of time to think about what makes a reason sufficient. You are the first thing in 63 years that is doing something. That is sufficient." By the time 3 months had passed, I had saved 40 credits and learned more about starship systems than I had known existed. I had also, without fully planning it, started to become part of the Rings community. The other workers knew me. The vendors knew me. The cargo operators knew which kid to call when something mechanical was misbehaving, and they did not want to pay for a certified technician. The Valorian merchant, his name was Araveth, which I only learned because I saw it on a shipping label, started giving me more work, routine maintenance, small repairs. He never paid more than he needed to, but he always paid, and he always paid on time. I fixed a seal on his airlock. I recalibrated his cargo sensors. I replaced a faulty circuit board in his navigation backup system, using a component I bought second-hand for 2 credits, and then modified to fit an interface it was not originally designed for. Araveth watched me do that last job. He watched me cut the component, reshape it, reroute 3 connections, and test it twice before installing it. "Where did you learn that modification?" he asked. "I figured it out," I said. He was quiet for a moment. "That is not standard procedure." "No," I said, "but it works." He looked at the board, now installed and functioning perfectly. "Yes," he said, "it does." After 6 months, I had enough to buy my first real part for the Meridian, a second-hand atmospheric processor I found listed on the station's internal trade network, sold by a scrapper who had pulled it from a ship being dismantled in the upper docks. It was not new. It had 3 components that needed replacement, and 1 sensor that gave inaccurate readings. I bought it for 18 credits, which was most of what I had. I carried it to Bay 47 in 3 trips. It was heavy. I dropped 1 section trying to get it through the hatch, and left a dent in the corridor floor that is probably still there. It took me 2 weeks to get it installed and functional. Meridian talked me through the installation step by step, flagging errors before I made them, explaining why certain connections needed to be made in a certain order. When I finally activated it, and the first cycle of properly processed air moved through the ship's internal spaces, Meridian said nothing for almost a minute. Then it said, "I have not felt that in a long time." "Does it matter to you?" I asked. "You don't breathe." "No," it said. "But I remember when this ship had living crew aboard. That sound, the air system running, was always the sound of life inside me. I had forgotten how much I associated the two. I did not know what to say to that. So I said nothing, and after a moment Meridian said, "Thank you, Marcus." It was the first time it had used my name. I was still sleeping in the pilot's seat, but the ship was warmer now, and it smelled different. Not like old rust and sealed-in decay, but like clean metal and processed air. Small things, but real things. The ship was changing, slowly, expensively, with setbacks and failures, and 3 separate occasions where I had to take something apart and start over because I had done it wrong the first time. But it was changing. 9 months after I bought the Meridian, A boy named Owen showed up in the corridor outside Bay 47 and stood there until I noticed him. He was 16, a year older than me, with short dark hair and a bruise along his jaw that had gone yellow-green at the edges, which meant it was a few days old. He said he had heard I sometimes needed help. He said he would work for food. I looked at him for a moment. I recognized something in his expression that I had seen in my own face, in reflective surfaces for the past 9 months. I said, "Can you follow instructions?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Can you handle small spaces?" He said, "Yes." I said, "Come in." His name was Owen Garrett, and he became the first person besides me to know about Meridian. He heard the voice from the cockpit on his second day and stopped moving entirely, every muscle in his body locked, his eyes going wide. I said, "It's all right. That's the ship. Her name is Meridian." Owen stared at the cockpit door. Then he looked at me. Then he looked back at the cockpit door. Meridian said, in its now clear and steady voice, "Hello, Owen Garrett." Owen let out a long breath. Then he said, "Okay," and he went back to work. He was not an engineer. He was not especially technical, but he was strong. He was careful. He followed instructions precisely, and he never complained. He helped me move the heavy components I could not manage alone. He held things in place while I made connections. He learned to read the basic diagnostic outputs that Meridian could display on the one working screen in the cockpit, and he got genuinely good at interpreting them. I was 15 years old, and I owned a broken ship, and I had one friend and an alien intelligence teaching me everything it knew. And every day, the ship got a little less broken. I want to be clear about something. It was not easy. There were days when nothing worked, and I sat in the cockpit with my back against the wall and stared at the ceiling and tried to remember why I had not given up. There were days when parts I had saved for weeks to buy arrived wrong or broken or incompatible with what I had. There were days when Meridian's voice went quiet for hours at a time because its backup power cell was fluctuating, and I would sit in the dark wondering if I had finally lost the one consistent thing in my life. But there was always something else too. A problem I had not solved yet, a system I had not understood yet, a connection between two things that I could almost see but not quite, and then I would see it, and the understanding would settle into place like a key turning in a lock, and I would pick up my tools and go back to work. Meridian said once, during a quiet evening, when we were both simply present and nothing needed fixing for a change, "You do not rest the way other species rest." "What do you mean?" I asked. "Rest is supposed to be the absence of problem solving. You spend your rest periods thinking about problems. I think about solutions," I said. "Is there a difference?" I thought about it. "For me there is," I said. "Problems are the things I don't control. Solutions are what I do with them. Thinking about solutions isn't tiring. It's the other kind of thinking." Meridian processed that. The Keth had a concept, it said slowly, a word that roughly translates as forward sight, the capacity to look at an obstacle and see past it to what lies beyond. They considered it rare. "What happened to the Keth?" I asked. "They did not disappear," Meridian said. "They became something different, quieter, more internal. They built things, and then stepped back from them. The Federation is partly their architecture. But they withdrew from its daily operations centuries ago." A pause. "They were very old when they built me. I sometimes wonder if they were tired." "Do you get tired?" I asked. "No," it said. "I get quiet. There is a difference." I was 15 when I bought the ship, and I was still 15 when I understood, for the first time, that I was not simply trying to survive. I was building something. It was not clear yet what it would become. I could not see that far ahead. But something was being built, and I was the one building it, and that was enough. The year moved forward. I turned 16 in the cockpit of a ship that now had working atmospheric processing, partial internal lighting, powered by a used power cell I had bought in 3 installments, and a sealed hull in all but 2 locations. Owen brought me a piece of cake he had made somehow from ration powder and dried fruit. Meridian said nothing but pulsed its amber light in a rhythm I had never seen before, and which I chose to interpret as celebratory. I looked at the ownership document Gerald had printed for me, still folded and slightly crumpled in the front pocket of my bag. Half a Federation credit. My ship, my walls, my door. There was a long way to go. I knew that. The engines were still missing. The drive core was still missing. Life support was partial. There were systems I had not even begun to address. Flying, actual flying, leaving this bay, going somewhere, was still a distant idea, more dream than plan. But I had paid 50 cents for something nobody else wanted, and every single day, I got up and made it worth a little more than it had been the day before. That, I was beginning to understand, was what I was made of. What all of us were made of, the ones who stayed when leaving, would have been so much easier. I picked up my tools. There was work to do. 3 years after I first climbed through that hatch, the Meridian could fly. Not well, not far, not quietly. When I ran the engines for the first time and the ship shook itself like a wet animal and the thrust nozzles spat a sound like someone rolling a mountain downhill, Gerald from the Bay Authority came running down the corridor with 2 of his assistants behind him, all 3 of them convinced that something structural had failed and Ring 9 was about to lose atmospheric integrity. It had not. It was just the sound of a ship that had not moved under its own power in over 60 years, remembering what it was supposed to do. I was 18. I had spent 3 years learning faster than any school had ever taught me, working harder than I had known a person could work, and pouring every credit I earned back into the ship. I had a crew of sorts, Owen Garrett, who by this point had become someone I trusted with my life, and who could diagnose a power relay problem by sound alone. A girl named Clara Webb, 17, who had drifted into Bay 47 8 months earlier, looking for a place to stay, and turned out to have a mathematical mind that made my own look ordinary. And a Keth engineer named Voss who had shown up one afternoon, looked at the ship, looked at me, and then sat down on a crate and started talking about engine calibration. Voss was old. I did not know how old. The Keth aged differently than humans, and Voss's age had settled into him like something geological, deep and quiet, and not especially concerned with being measured. He had short, blunt fingers, and a habit of tilting his head when he was thinking, and he had watched me work for 2 hours before he said his first word to me. The word was, why. I looked up from the coupling I was connecting. Why what? Why do you do this work the way you do it? He asked. You connected that coupling in the wrong sequence. It will hold, but it is inefficient. There is a correct sequence. I didn't know the correct sequence, I said. I know, he said. I am asking why you proceeded without knowing. I thought about it. Because waiting to know everything before starting means never starting, I said. Voss looked at me with the particular stillness of someone deciding something important. Then he said, I will stay for a while. He stayed for the next 8 months, and he rewrote everything I thought I understood about Keth engineering. Not because my understanding was wrong. Some of it was surprisingly right, assembled from Meridian's teaching and my own trial and error, but because Voss taught depth where I had breadth. He knew the reasons behind the systems, not just the systems themselves. He knew why the Keth built ships the way they built them, what principles they were trying to honor, what they were trying to avoid. He also, I noticed, kept a small notebook in which he wrote things down after watching me work. I asked him once what he was writing. Observations, he said. About what? About your species, he said. I have worked with human engineers before. Not many, but enough to find you consistently puzzling. Puzzling how? I asked. You approach problems as though they are personally offensive to you, he said. As though the problem has chosen to exist specifically to be in your way, and your response to that is personal indignation. I laughed. Is that bad? It is highly effective, he said, in a tone that suggested he was still not sure how he felt about that. The engines came first. I found a set of second-hand thrust units from a Valorian hauler that had been decommissioned after a navigation failure. The ship had flown into a debris field at the wrong angle, and the hull was beyond repair. But the engines were fine. They were not Keth design. They were not designed for a Keth-class hull. Voss looked at them for a long time when I brought them in, and then made a sound I had learned meant something between amusement and concern. These are not compatible, he said. Not directly, I said, but I think I can make them work. He made the sound again. The modification took 11 weeks. I designed a coupling interface that had never existed before, that connected Valorian thrust architecture to Keth structural mounts through an adapter system that I built from parts sourced from 4 different species' discarded components. Clara ran the mathematics on the load distribution 3 times to make sure the hull would handle the thrust angles. Meridian ran simulations. Voss watched with his notebook. The first test was with the ship still on the ground. I powered the engines to 20%, and the whole bay shook, and dust fell from the ceiling, and Owen grabbed a support strut and grinned, like someone who was not entirely sure they were going to survive this, but was very glad to be here for it. The coupling held. The hull held. The thrust was clean. Voss wrote something in his notebook. "What did you write?" I asked. I wrote, "It works," he said. I add to this notebook when humans do things that should not work but do. It is a long notebook. Getting permission to do a test flight was its own problem. Ring 9 was a docking facility, not a launch facility. Ships that wanted to depart Callisto Station needed departure clearance from the station authority, which required a registered ship profile, certified systems inspection, and a valid pilot's license. I had a valid pilot's license. I had earned it in a simulator at the Ring 6 Recreation Center over 6 months of weekend sessions, paid for with extra jobs. I was not supposed to have been allowed to take the simulation training without a co-pilot's endorsement from a certified instructor, but the simulation facility had an oversight in their ID verification system, and I had found it. The registered ship profile was trickier. The Meridian's original registry was 63 years old, and listed under Keth filing systems that the current Federation database could barely read. I spent 3 weeks navigating Federation registry bureaucracy, which was its own particular variety of painful. Clara helped. She had a talent for finding the specific rule that allowed you to do the thing the other rules seemed to prevent. The rule she found was in a subsection of Federation maritime law, originally written to address ships of mixed alien ownership. Because Meridian, the thinking core, was a registered Keth intelligence, and because Keth intelligences had legal standing in Federation law, the ship could be filed under a dual registry, Keth vessel designation, with human operator authorization. It was legal. It was specifically, technically, unambiguously legal. The clerk who processed our registration looked like she was trying to find the part where it was not legal and could not. She stamped our paperwork. The departure clearance took 2 more days and a detailed submitted flight plan for a short-range shakedown route around the station's outer ring, no more than 20 kilometers from the hull, returned to Bay 47. On the morning of the test flight, we were all in the cockpit, me in the pilot's seat, which no longer needed a thermal blanket because it had been properly reupholstered with material I had bought second-hand. Owen at the systems monitoring station we had built into the port wall. Clara at the navigational interface. Meridian's presence surrounding all of us, steady and alive. Voss was not in the cockpit. He was on the dock outside, watching through the bay door. He had declined to come aboard for the flight, citing reasons he described as personal. I suspected the real reason was that he wanted to watch from the outside. I did not push. The bay door opened. Beyond it was the external docking arm, and then the black of space and the pale gray curve of Callisto below. I looked at the controls for a moment. I had been looking at these controls for 3 years. I had rebuilt most of them. I knew every switch, every display, every connection behind every panel. Meridian said quietly, "Ready, Marcus." I said, "Let's go." The Meridian moved out of Bay 47 under her own power for the first time in 63 years. The flight was 17 minutes long. We went nowhere in particular. Out along the station's exterior, around the curve of the upper docking ring, back down the other side, and home to Bay 47, with a landing that was slightly rougher than I would have liked, but well within safe parameters. The whole crew of Ring 9 who happened to be around came to the bay door to watch us come in. Gerald was there. He had his arms crossed and his beard was tucked against his chest, which was what he did when he was trying to look unimpressed. He did not quite succeed. When I stepped out of the ship, Voss was standing there. He was not writing in his notebook. He was just watching me, with that geological stillness of his. "Well?" I said. "She flies," he said. "She does," I said. "In 63 years," he said, "no one did this. 14 owners. I looked up the registry records. 14 different buyers. 14 different species. None of them stayed long enough. None of them had the resources you had. None of them had your knowledge. I had almost no knowledge when I started, I said. No, Voss agreed. But you had something else. You had the absolute certainty that not knowing was temporary. Every species I have observed treats the unknown as a boundary. You treat it as a delay. I thought about that. Is that unusual? Among species young enough to still be surprised by the galaxy, he said. Yes, remarkably so. That evening, after everyone else had gone, I sat in the pilot's seat in the dark cockpit and looked out through the viewport at the black outside. The stars were not moving, because we were docked, because we were still. But I could feel the difference from 3 years ago. The ship was alive. She hummed faintly in ways she had not hummed before. The sound of systems running, of power flowing, of something that had been broken deciding to be whole. Meridian said, "How does it feel?" "Like a beginning," I said. "Yes," it said, "that is what it is." I thought about the next step. Flying short range around the station was proof that the ship worked. What came next was harder. The drive core. The faster-than-light jump system that would take the Meridian from a local shuttle to a real ship, capable of crossing the distances between stars. I had been researching it for months. Drive cores were expensive. Genuinely, substantially expensive. Not the second-hand components expensive I had been dealing with. The cheapest functional unit I had found listed on any trade network was 4,000 credits. I had 230. I told Meridian the number. There was a pause. "You will need to earn more," it said. "Yes," I said. "This will take some time." "Yes," I said. "Are you concerned?" I looked out at the stars. "No," I said. "I'm planning." And I was. Because the ship could fly now. A ship that could fly could carry cargo. Cargo meant contracts. Contracts meant income that was larger and more reliable than dockside repair jobs. I had not bought this ship to keep it in a bay forever. I had bought it to go somewhere. And the thing about going somewhere was that you could not get there by staying still. The next morning, I started looking for cargo contracts. There were not many available to a ship with our profile. Small, new registry, no track record, human captained. But there were some. The ones nobody else wanted. The difficult deliveries, the awkward routes, the cargo that needed to go somewhere inconvenient and did not pay enough for an established operator to bother. I took all of them. The first contract was a delivery of medical equipment to a small human habitat on the far side of Callisto, a 2-hour flight, a tricky docking approach because the habitat's bay was designed for a smaller ship, and the payment was 40 credits. 40 credits for 2 hours of flight. It was more than I made in 2 days of repair work. We made the delivery. The habitat manager, a tired-looking woman named Petra who ran the medical station with 3 other people and approximately no budget, watched us dock with the skeptical expression of someone who has learned to expect disappointment. When we unloaded the equipment correctly, undamaged, on time, she said, "You're new." "Yes," I said. "You're human." "Yes," I said. She looked at me for another moment. Then she said, "Come back next month. I'll have another order." We came back the next month, and the month after that, and slowly, across the outer Callisto shipping lanes, a reputation started forming around the name Marcus Vane and the ship called the Meridian. Not a big reputation yet, not a famous one, but a real one. The human kid with the patched-together ship who showed up when he said he would, delivered what he promised to deliver, and found routes through difficulties that made other captains shake their heads. A Thurvac engineer named Krell came aboard to inspect the engine coupling system I had built, after hearing about it from Voss. The Thurvac were among the best shipbuilders in the Federation, an insectoid species with 4 arms and compound eyes, and an institutional knowledge of starship engineering that went back 4,000 years. Krell was large, formal, and said almost nothing when he first came aboard. He went directly to the engine compartment and spent 2 hours in there without speaking. When he came out, he said, "This should not work." I said, "I know, but it does." He said, "The load distribution across this coupling interface is theoretically impossible." I said, "Clara did the mathematics. It checks out." He looked at Clara, who looked back at him with the calm confidence of someone who had checked her work 3 times and knew it was right. Krell returned his gaze to me. I would like to understand how you arrived at this design. I showed him my notes. He sat in the cargo bay for 4 hours, reading through notebooks I had filled over 3 years with calculations, ideas, failed attempts, and the modifications that had eventually worked. He turned pages slowly. He stopped often. He made sounds, small, low, non-verbal sounds that I could not interpret. When he finished, he closed the last notebook and set it down. You have received formal training? He asked. No, I said. No engineering education. No. You built this from first principles. From first principles. From Meridian's teaching. From Voss. And from trying things until they worked, I said. Krell was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I have been a shipwright for 200 years. In that time, I have seen approximately 4 engineering solutions that could not be derived from any existing framework, that I could not have predicted from any starting point. He tapped the notebook. This is the 5th. He went back to his office. 2 days later, he sent me a message. It contained a single component listing, a drive core, surplus from a Thurvac research program, graded as functional but non-standard, offered at a price of 1,100 credits. Well below market value for a functioning drive core. The message said only, for the Meridian. If you can install a coupling no one else could design, you can install this. I stared at that message for a long time. 1,100 credits was still far more than I had. But it was not 4,000. It was a number I could reach. I worked every contract I could get. Owen took on extra cargo loading shifts. Clara tutored mathematics to station kids in exchange for materials. We saved. We cut everything that could be cut. We ate simpler. We slept less. 8 months later, I sent Krell 1,100 credits in a single transfer, which took almost everything I had, and he sent back a drive core packed in Thurvac shipping casing, with installation documentation so detailed and precise, it read like a piece of art. The installation took 6 weeks. Meridian talked me through every stage. Voss came back to supervise the critical connections. Clara verified every calibration calculation. Owen held the core steady during the mount process for 4 hours, without complaint, when the magnetic clamp kept misfiring. When it was done, when the drive core was seated and connected and powered, and the diagnostic showed green across every single indicator, we all stood in the engine room, and nobody said anything for almost a minute. Meridian said, Marcus, we can go anywhere now. I looked around at Owen and Clara and the empty space where Voss had been standing until he stepped back to write something in his notebook. I thought about Bay 47 and the gap between the fuel compressors and Gerald's smudged stamp on a piece of paper and a price tag that said half a credit. Yes, I said. We can. The galaxy was out there. It did not know we were coming. That was about to change. The first time a Federation patrol vessel told me to change course, I was 3 months out of Callisto Station, running a cargo contract through the outer trade lanes, and I had not slept properly in 2 days. The patrol vessel was a compact registered ship, long and gray and authoritative in the way that ships designed to project authority are authoritative. It materialized out of jump space ahead of us on the lane, and its hailing signal hit our communication systems with the particular tone that meant it expected to be answered immediately. I answered it. The officer on screen was Valorian, senior by the look of the rank markings on his collar. He looked at me the way people look at something unexpected, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the fractional pause, the recalibration of what they thought they were going to see. He said, Identify your vessel and captain. I said, Captain Marcus Vane, vessel Unyielding Meridian, registry under Keth Human joint designation. We're carrying agricultural components under contract to the Dervin Station Depot. He pulled up something on his screen that I could not see. He looked at it. He looked at me. Your registry shows a human captain on a Keth designation vessel, he said. That's correct, I said. What is the nature of your relationship to the registered intelligence aboard? Meridian is the ship's navigational intelligence. I'm the captain. The joint designation is legal under Federation Maritime Code. Subsection 14, paragraph 7. He knew the subsection. I could see it in his face. He knew it was legal. He was looking for the part that was not. He did not find it. "This lane," he said, "is restricted to Class 4 carriers and above. Your vessel is registered as Class 3. I had looked this up. Class restriction exemptions apply to vessels carrying medical or agricultural goods under emergency priority contract, I said. Our contract with Dervin Station is filed as agricultural priority. That exempts us from the lane restriction under Maritime Code Section 9. There was a pause. He checked his screen again. He said, in a tone that had shifted slightly, not hostile exactly, but something had sharpened in it. "You know these regulations well for a human captain." "I've had time to read," I said. He looked at me for another moment. Then he said, "Continue on your present course. And Captain Vane, in the future I would suggest using the lanes designated for your vessel class. The exemption pathway is legal, but it draws attention." "I appreciate the advice," I said, in a tone that did not commit to following it. He cut the channel. Owen looked at me from the system station. Clara looked up from the navigation interface. Neither of them said anything, but there was a quality to their silence that communicated clearly. We noticed what he was actually saying. What he was actually saying was, "You do not belong here." I had known that. I had known it from the first time I looked at a Federation trade route map and saw the lanes marked in different colors for different species classifications. Human shipping was permitted in the inner lanes, the close routes, the low-profit runs. The outer lanes, the ones that connected the richer systems, the longer and more profitable routes, were restricted to established carriers, meaning species with long trade histories and political standing. Humanity had neither. We were a Tier 3 emerging species, which meant we were new enough to be considered provisional and unestablished enough to be excluded from the systems where real money moved. This was the situation. It was not new information. I had been operating around its edges since I started taking contracts. The problem was that the contracts available inside the permitted lanes were not enough, not for what I needed. I had a functioning ship with a functional drive core, and a crew that needed to eat, and a ship that needed ongoing maintenance, and a future that required capital. I was not going to accumulate on the margins of the trade system the Federation had built for us. Meridian said, on a private channel while I was thinking about this, "You are planning again." "Always," I said. The compact patrol officer was correct that the exemption pathway draws attention. "Yes," I said. He was correct. "And yet you used it." "And yet I used it," I agreed, because the alternative was to take the longer route and arrive late, which would have cost me 20 credits in penalty fees and damaged my delivery reputation, which is the only asset I currently have. "So you accepted attention as the cost of the decision." "I accepted attention as the cost of a decision that was correct," I said. "Those aren't the same thing. If I made decisions based on avoiding attention, I would still be in Bay 47. Meridian considered this. "What happens when the attention becomes more than an annoyance?" "Then I deal with it," I said, "but not before." The next 6 months were a systematic education in how the Federation trade system actually worked, which turned out to be considerably more complex and more political than the rulebook suggested. There were rules, and then there were the rules behind the rules, the informal agreements between the major species, the handshake understandings about who operated where, the quiet expectations that shaped which contracts got offered to which operators. Humans were expected to operate at a certain level, below a certain threshold of profitability, below a certain scale of operation. Not by any written law. The written laws were actually fairly neutral once you knew how to read them, but by the accumulated weight of assumption and habit, and the fact that nobody in the systems that mattered had ever had reason to expect otherwise. I spent a lot of time finding the written rules that the unwritten assumptions were quietly violating. Clara was invaluable for this. She had a mind that moved through regulatory documents the way water moves through channels, finding the path of least resistance, the gap in the wall, the subsection nobody had thought to block because nobody had thought anyone would use it. She found the exemptions, the special designations, the filing procedures that technically allowed us to be where we were not supposed to be. I found the clients who needed someone to use those filings. They were not hard to find, once I started looking. The Federation was enormous. It covered hundreds of star systems, and contained dozens of species, and produced more commercial activity than any single entity could track. And like any system that large, it had edges and gaps and corners where things fell through. Cargo that needed to move between systems that were connected by routes the established carriers found inconvenient. Goods that were too small a quantity for the large operators but too specialized for the general haulers. Situations where the bureaucratic complexity of a delivery made established operators charge extra or decline entirely. We took all of it. Complicated deliveries, awkward routes, politically sensitive cargo that nobody wanted to touch, anything that paid and that we could manage. And we managed more than I expected, because we were small enough to go where large ships could not, legal enough to go where unofficial operators could not, and stubborn enough to find the filing pathway through every bureaucratic barrier we hit. Our reputation grew. Not loudly, not publicly. In the outer lanes, among the operators who worked the edges of the trade system the way we did. The human captain who knew the regulations better than the regulators. The ship that always delivered. 6 months in, I got a message from a woman named Iris Cole. Iris was human, older than me by 15 years, and she operated a small cargo brokerage out of Fenn Station, about 6 light hours from our current route. Her message was brief and direct. She had heard of us. She had clients with complicated needs. She wanted to meet. We diverted to Fenn Station. Iris Cole was exactly what her message suggested she would be. Efficient, precise, and not interested in small talk. She had short brown hair, eyes that missed nothing, and an office that was neat in the way that extremely busy people's offices are neat, which is to say that the chaos was organized rather than absent. She looked at me across her desk with the expression of someone doing rapid calculations. "You're younger than I expected," she said. "I get that a lot," I said. "How long have you been operating?" "Actively carrying cargo for about a year," I said. "Before that, 3 years rebuilding the ship. Your delivery record is perfect." "Yes," I said. "No late deliveries, no damaged goods, no failed contracts." "Correct." She leaned back slightly. "The Compact Patrol filed a complaint about your exemption pathway usage 3 months ago. Did you know that?" "No," I said, "but I'm not surprised." "It was dismissed," she said. "The exemption is valid, but they filed it." "What does that mean to you?" I asked. "It means you're making someone uncomfortable," she said, "which means you're doing something right, from my perspective." She folded her hands on the desk. "I have clients who need reliability more than they need ease. Routes that are difficult, politically complicated, or simply outside what established operators want to deal with. I've been waiting for someone like you for a while. I didn't expect someone like you to be 21. 18 when I started," I said. She raised an eyebrow. "Is that relevant?" I asked. "Not professionally," she said. "Humanly it is. Where did you come from?" "Ring 9, I said. "Callisto Station." She knew what that meant. She had been around long enough to know what Ring 9 meant. She looked at me for a moment with something in her expression that was not pity. It was the recognition of someone who understands a particular kind of beginning. "All right," she said. "I have a contract. It will pay well. It is not simple." The contract was a pharmaceutical delivery to a small colony called Veth 6, which was in a system that the Compact's shipping authority had recently reclassified as a restricted transit zone due to a border dispute between 2 member species. Restricted transit meant no commercial shipping without Compact approval. Compact approval meant bureaucratic delays that could run 6 to 8 weeks. The colony's medical supply was scheduled to arrive 4 weeks ago. I asked Meridian to analyze the transit restriction. Meridian said, "The restriction covers commercial cargo vessels above Class 5. We are Class 3. I said, "So we're exempt." "The restriction does not explicitly address our class," Meridian said. "It was written to prevent large commercial operators from crossing the zone during the diplomatic proceedings. It did not anticipate a vessel of our class attempting the route. So there's no rule that says we can't." "There is no rule that says you can," Meridian said. "Which is different." "Is it legally different?" A pause. "In Federation maritime law, actions not explicitly prohibited are generally permitted. However, the Compact has historically interpreted this principle conservatively when it serves them." I thought about it. Clara pulled up the transit restriction documentation and read through it. She found the relevant section in 12 minutes. She was getting faster at this, and confirmed, Nothing in the restriction explicitly prohibited Class 3 vessels. "We can file a route notification," she said. "It doesn't require approval for our class, just notification." "File it," I said. She filed it. We got no response, which was itself a kind of answer. The filing system had accepted it without flagging an issue, which meant it had processed us as compliant. We went to Veth 6. The approach through the transit zone was tense. We were tracked from the moment we entered. I could see the monitoring pings on our sensor display, the quiet mechanical attention of compact patrol vessels watching our course, but none of them hailed us. None of them moved to intercept. We were a Class 3 vessel on a filed route notification, and however much the attention of patrol officers might not like it, there was nothing in their legal framework that authorized a stop. We delivered the pharmaceuticals to Veth 6. The colony's medical coordinator was a thin man named Philip who had been sleeping in his office for 3 days waiting for a delivery that kept not arriving. He looked at our manifest, looked at our cargo, and then sat down heavily in his chair and put his face in his hands for a moment. When he looked up, his eyes were bright. "You have no idea," he said. "I have some idea," I said. We were paid, well paid. Iris Cole's brokerage applied a difficulty premium to contracts that the established operators declined, and she passed that premium along. It was more money in a single delivery than I had made in 2 months of standard runs. On the way out of the system, an enforcer vessel matched our course. It was a compact ship, dark blue, with the markings of the Hegemony Compact's trade authority. It pulled alongside us and held position for 11 minutes without transmitting. Then it hailed. The officer on screen was a species I recognized as Dravathi, small, pale, with large eyes that held a kind of flat, steady attention. He did not introduce himself. He said, "Captain Vane." "Yes," I said. "You filed a Class 3 route notification to transit the restricted zone." "Yes," I said. "The intent of the restriction was to prevent commercial operations in the zone." "The restriction itself did not address Class 3 vessels," I said. "Our filing was compliant with Federation Maritime Code." "It was technically compliant," he said. "It was compliant," I said. "Technical implies a distinction that does not exist in the law." He looked at me for a long moment. "Humanity has a Tier 3 classification," he said. "It is customary for Tier 3 species to operate within the routes designated for their development tier." "I am aware of the custom," I said. "I am also aware that it is a custom and not a law. The maritime code I operate under applies to all registered Federation vessels without species distinction. Customs exist for reasons," he said. "I don't doubt it," I said. "I simply don't know that those reasons apply to me." There was a pause that lasted almost 10 seconds. His face gave nothing away. Then he said, "Stay in your lane, primate." He cut the channel. Owen made a sound. Clara said nothing but typed something briefly, probably a note in the delivery log. She documented everything. Meridian said, privately, "That was a threat." "Yes," I said. "Are you concerned?" I looked at the enforcer vessel through the viewport. It was still holding position alongside us, which was itself a message, big and dark and official, and meant to be felt. "No," I said, "I'm annoyed." "There is a difference?" "Concern would mean I'm thinking about what they want me to do," I said. "I'm thinking about what I want to do, different process." "And what do you want to do?" I watched the enforcer vessel. I thought about Philip, sitting in his office for 3 days. I thought about Bay 47 and Gerald's stamp and a half a credit paper in my pocket. "I want to keep doing what I'm doing," I said, "and I want to do it better." The enforcer vessel eventually peeled away and jumped out of the system. We continued on our course. That night I sat in the cockpit and looked at the star chart and thought about the Hegemony Compact. They were 3 species, compact members, dominant powers, who between them controlled about 70% of Federation commercial trade. They had built that control over centuries through political maneuvering, strategic alliances, and the quiet management of which species got access to which markets at which times. It was not malicious. It was just power, working the way power tends to work, maintaining itself. I was a small human captain in a ship that should not fly, running routes nobody wanted, and I had managed to become noticeable enough for a compact enforcer to tell me personally to stay in my lane. I took that as a data point. If you are small and nobody knows you exist, nothing happens. If you are small and someone important tells you to stop, it means you are doing something that matters. Iris Cole's next message arrived the following week. She had 6 new contracts. All of them difficult. All of them in areas where the established operators were finding the compact's informal restrictions too uncomfortable to navigate. I accepted all 6. And then I started thinking about who else was running the edges of this system the way I was. Other small operators, other difficult routes, other people who had found the gaps in the rules and were quietly using them. They were out there. I had met some of them at stations, in depots, in the brief social moments that cargo work occasionally produced. A Veth hauler named Arlen, a Dravathi pilot named Sis. 2 humans running a pair of ships out of a station I had passed through. What we all had in common was that we were working separately, each of us finding our own exemptions, our own routes, our own clients, doing it alone. I thought about what it would mean to do it together. I started writing messages, not proposals exactly, just conversation starters. Hey, I heard you run the Fen to Outer Veth route. Have you run into the Class 2 restriction at the junction? I found something interesting in the filing code. Want to talk? Most people wrote back. The galaxy did not know what was being built. Not yet. But something was being built. The way the Meridian had been built, piece by piece, in a bay that nobody watched, by someone who was too stubborn to stop. I was 21 years old. I had a ship that should not exist, a crew I trusted completely, a reputation that was growing faster than the people watching me seemed to realize, and a set of enemies who had just made the mistake of telling me I could not do something. I had learned a long time ago what that kind of statement did to me. It made me plan harder. The Dravathi colony on Veth Minor did not make the Federation news. Small colonies rarely did, and the Dravathi were not a species with a powerful voice in Federation media. They were Tier 3, like humanity, which meant their stories were filed under the category of things that were unfortunate, but not urgent. The blockade around their system was described in the official compact communique as a trade compliance measure, pending dispute resolution. 7 words. 7 words to describe the fact that a colony of 4,000 people, most of them families who had left their homeworld 2 generations ago to build something in a difficult system, were watching their medical supplies run out. I found out about it from Sis. She messaged me on a Tuesday. I was in the middle of a navigational recalibration in the Meridian's cockpit, the kind of routine maintenance that needed doing every few months to keep the drive core alignment accurate. The message came through on the crew channel, flagged priority by Clara because Sis had marked it that way. I read it. The compact had designated the Veth Minor system a contested zone following a jurisdictional argument between 2 compact members about mineral extraction rights in the outer asteroid belt. The designation triggered an automatic shipping restriction. All incoming cargo was subject to compact approval before transit. Approval was being processed in sequence, and the current processing time was 6 to 8 weeks. The colony's pharmaceutical shipment, monthly supply, specifically the cardiac regulation medications that 12% of the population needed to survive, had been held at the jump point for 18 days. At the current rate, Sis estimated 20% of the patients dependent on those medications would face critical health events within 16 days. I put down the calibration tool. Meridian said, "You have read the message." "Yes," I said. "I have already analyzed the transit restriction," it said. "It is a full restriction. No exemptions are available under the standard Class 3 pathway. The cargo requires compact approval." "How long for approval?" "The current processing queue runs 44 days. "That's too long." "Yes," Meridian said, "by approximately 4 weeks." I sat for a moment and thought. Clara came to the cockpit doorway. She had seen the message priority flag and come to find me. Owen was behind her. We had been a crew long enough that they did not need me to brief them. I said, "The restriction covers commercial cargo carriers. The cargo is a pharmaceutical shipment." Clara said, "Pharmaceutical cargo still requires compact approval under the contested zone designation." "Yes," I said, "commercial pharmaceutical cargo does." She looked at me, the way she looked at me when she knew I was following a thought she had not caught up to yet. "What other kind of pharmaceutical cargo is there?" "Humanitarian aid is classified separately. I said. Humanitarian medical aid to a civilian population experiencing a health emergency is exempt from commercial transit restrictions under Federation Treaty Article 19, Paragraph 4. The colony is not in a declared health emergency, Clara said. Not yet, I said. But the treaty does not require a formal declaration. It requires that a reasonable assessment of risk to civilian health meet the criteria. 12% of a population dependent on cardiac medication, who are 16 days from a health crisis, is a reasonable assessment. Clara was quiet for a moment. Then she pulled out her datapad and started checking. Meridian said, "There is a secondary complication. Even if the humanitarian exemption applies, the filing must be submitted to the Federation Health Registry, not the Compact Trade Authority. The two systems do not communicate well. There is a 12 to 18-hour processing window. That's manageable," I said. "There is also the matter of how the Compact will respond when they see a cargo vessel transit their contested zone on a humanitarian filing. They will be very unhappy," I said. "Yes. Is there anything they can legally do about it if the filing is correct?" Meridian paused. It was the kind of pause it did when it was being thorough, rather than uncertain. A correctly submitted humanitarian exemption transit is legally protected under Federation Treaty. Interference with humanitarian transit is a treaty violation that carries significant political consequences. "So they can be unhappy," I said, "but they cannot stop us without breaking the treaty they signed." "That is correct," Meridian said, "assuming the filing is correct." I looked at Clara. She was already working. 12 minutes, she said, without looking up. I messaged Sis back. I told her what I was planning and asked her to confirm the cargo specifications and current position. She responded in 4 minutes. The shipment was being held at the jump point by a compact inspection vessel. It had been released by the original carrier, a large commercial operator who had decided that a contested zone crossing was too much political risk for their business, and was sitting in an independent storage container at the jump station. I needed to transfer legal custody of the cargo before I filed the humanitarian exemption. The cargo needed to be mine to file the exemption as the transporting operator. I contacted the jump station cargo authority, gave them my registry details, and paid the transfer fee, which was 68 credits, and which reduced my available funds to a level that made Owen wince when Clara updated the account screen. "It's fine," I told him. "It is extremely not fine," he said. "It's fine," I said again. Clara filed the humanitarian exemption with the Federation Health Registry at 11:14 in the morning. The processing confirmation came back at 11:19, 5 minutes, much faster than the 18-hour maximum, which suggested that the automated system had recognized the situation as straightforward. We jumped to the VETH minor system approach at 11:47. The compact inspection vessel that had been holding the cargo at the jump point was a mid-size enforcer, bigger than us, heavily registered, with the compact's triple bar marking prominent on its hull. It had 2 companion ships, which I had not expected, both positioned at angles that suggested they had been told to bracket the approach lane. They hailed us before we finished our jump resolution. The officer on screen was a thurvac, one of the large insectoid species, broad-bodied, with compound eyes that reflected the cockpit lights in small bright points. Senior rank markings, which told me this was not routine. "Vessel Meridian," he said, "you are entering a contested transit zone. All commercial cargo operations require compact approval. Please state your authorization code." "Captain Marcus Vane," I said. "Vessel Unyielding Meridian. We are not operating under commercial cargo authorization. We are transiting under Federation Humanitarian Medical Exemption, Treaty Article 19, Paragraph 4, filing reference number 77 Alpha-349. You can verify with the Federation Health Registry." There was a pause. He was checking. The pause was longer than a simple database query. I could see on my sensor display that one of the companion vessels had moved, not toward us, not away, but sideways, adjusting its position, repositioning, the kind of movement that happened when someone wanted to keep options open. Meridian said, quietly on the private channel, "The companion vessels are running targeting acquisition scans. They are not locking weapons, but they are preparing to." I kept my expression neutral. "Noted," I said quietly. The thurvac officer came back on screen. Your filing has been received, he said. However, we question the validity of the humanitarian classification. The colony has not declared a formal health emergency. Treaty Article 19 does not require a formal declaration, I said. It requires documented risk to civilian health. Our filing includes medical data provided by the colony's health authority showing 16 days to critical health events for cardiac patients. I paused. I can walk you through the specific treaty language if that would help. His compound eyes were hard to read. The Thurvac tended towards stillness in their expressions, which meant what you could not see was doing the work. He said, "Human captains are not typically positioned to instruct compact officers in treaty law." "I'm not instructing you," I said. "I'm offering to share relevant documentation. The choice to review it is yours." Another pause. The companion vessel had stopped repositioning. It was holding position now. Still not locked, but not moving away. The Thurvac officer said, "Proceed to cargo collection. You will be monitored during transit. Any deviation from direct approach to the jump point will be considered a hostile action." "Understood," I said. "Maintaining direct approach. Thank you for your cooperation." I kept my voice level when I said that last part. It was important to say it. He cut the channel. Owen let out a long, slow breath. It was the kind of breath that contained everything he had been not saying for the last 8 minutes. I said, "Clara, log the exchange." "Already done," she said. Her hands were steady. I had noticed that about Clara. She was the kind of person who got calmer when things got more serious, as though fear was a resource she conserved for appropriate moments. "Meridian," I said. "What is the transit time to the colony's main station?" 2 hours, 14 minutes on direct approach, Meridian said. "Marcus, the companion vessels are following us." "I know," I said. "Let them." They followed us the entire way, at a distance, maintaining their bracket positions, running continuous monitoring pings on our hull. It felt like being escorted by 2 very hostile chaperones. I kept our course straight and our speed steady, and I did not give them anything to respond to. When we docked at Veth Miner's main station, the docking crew came out before we had finished settling the landing struts. They had been told we were coming. They knew what we were carrying. The cargo unloading took 40 minutes. Efficient, quiet, organized. The docking crew knew exactly where everything was going. The cardiac medications went first, directly to a small medical transport that was waiting at the bay mouth with its own refrigeration unit running. At the dock entrance, watching the unloading, was a Dravathi woman I had not expected to see. She was old, by the standards of her species. Her pale skin had the blue-tinged translucency that Dravathi developed in age, and she moved with the deliberate economy of someone for whom every action was considered. She watched the cargo come off our ship with the particular attention of someone seeing something they had been uncertain would arrive. When the medical transport pulled away, she looked at me. "You are the human captain," she said. "Yes," I said. "The compact will make this difficult for you," she said. "Yes," I said. "Probably. You came anyway." "The filing was legal," I said. "The transit was legal. Children were going to get sick. It seemed like a fairly simple decision." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something in Dravathi that I did not understand, and she saw that I did not understand it. And she said, "It means a simple decision made by someone whose heart works correctly. In our language, it is one word." We were on the return approach when the formal compact complaint arrived. It was filed through the Federation Trade Authority, citing improper use of humanitarian exemption provisions, challenge to the medical risk assessment methodology, and, this was the part I appreciated for its creativity, suggestion that the exemption filing had been submitted without proper Colonial Health Authority documentation. The Colonial Health Authority documentation had been submitted with the filing. I had it in triplicate. I forwarded the complaint to Iris Cole and asked her to connect me with the best Federation legal advisor she knew. She sent back a name within the hour, a human lawyer named Peter Aldridge who specialized in Federation commercial and humanitarian law, and who, according to Iris, was the person you called when the compact tried to make legal something that was not legal. Peter Aldridge looked at the complaint, looked at my filing, looked at my documentation and said, "This complaint has no merit. They know it has no merit. They filed it to create a record." "A record of what?" I asked. "A record of you," he said. They are establishing that you are someone they consider a problem. That is useful information for them. It is useful information for you. What do I do with it? Keep going, he said. And document everything. What you did today. That filing, that transit, everything that happened and everything they said. That is also a record. Records matter when things escalate. Things escalated. Not immediately. The compact moved carefully. They did not do anything that was directly illegal, because directly illegal actions created exactly the kind of record that Peter Aldridge was talking about. What they did instead was systematic. Contracts that my brokerage relationships had reliably produced began drying up. Route filings that had previously been processed smoothly started taking longer. At 3 separate stations, docking applications for the Meridian were delayed by administrative issues that resolved themselves after several hours. Always just long enough to complicate our schedule, never long enough to constitute an actionable complaint. It was pressure without contact, the kind of thing that breaks small operators because small operators cannot afford the friction. I had been a small operator once. I was not, quite, anymore. Iris Cole's brokerage had grown alongside us. We were her most reliable carrier, and our willingness to take the difficult routes had attracted clients who valued reliability over political convenience. She had 2 more human captains in her network now, both of whom had come to her after hearing about us. She had a Veth operator and 3 Dravathi independent haulers who coordinated loosely through her office. I called a meeting, not in person. We were spread across too many systems for that. A comm meeting, all channels open, everyone's face on a screen. I told them what was happening to me. I asked if it was happening to them. Arlen said he had lost 2 contracts in the last month with no explanation. Sis said her docking applications at Fenn Station had been delayed 4 times in 3 weeks. One of the Dravathi pilots, a young one, named Cray, who had been operating independently for about 8 months, said that a compact inspector had boarded his ship twice in 2 weeks, on grounds that his certification documentation needed re-verification. The certification documentation had been verified. Twice. I said. They are doing this to each of us separately, because they expect us to manage it separately. Each of us is small enough that the friction is supposed to be discouraging. Sis said. It is discouraging. Yes, I said. But it is less discouraging than I imagine they expected. What do you propose? Arlen asked. I propose that we stop being separate, I said. We document everything, and we share the documentation. We cross-file supporting statements when any one of us has a compact action taken against us. We demonstrate a pattern rather than a series of individual incidents. Patterns require lawyers, Iris Cole said, from her office screen. Peter Aldridge, I said. She smiled slightly. I had the same thought. We were 26 days into organizing our documentation. A quiet, careful process, legal and methodical, filing records with the Federation Trade Advocacy Office, when the compact escalated in a direction I had not anticipated. They pushed the motion for human species reclassification. It was presented at the Federation Council as a regulatory proposal, framed as a modernization of Tier 3 species management protocols. The details were buried in administrative language, but what they amounted to was this. Human commercial operators would be required to operate under compact certification, in addition to Federation registration. Compact certification required passing a Species Development Review Board assessment, which was conducted by a panel composed primarily of compact member species, and which had historically approved exactly 0 Tier 3 species applications in its 40-year history. In practical terms, every human operator, including me, would be unable to legally operate without compact approval that would never come. It was clean. It was political. It was not technically illegal, because the compact had enough Federation votes to pass it. The vote was scheduled for 12 days out. I sat in the cockpit and stared at the star chart for a long time. Meridian said, "You are thinking." "Yes," I said. "You have been thinking for 4 hours." "It's a significant problem," I said. "It is," Meridian agreed. "What have you concluded?" I looked at the chart. I thought about all the people I had come to know in the 3 years since I left Callisto Station, the operators, the colonial contacts, the people on Veth Minor who had a word in their language for a heart that worked correctly. I think, I said slowly, that the Compact's mistake is assuming this is only about me. Explain, Meridian said. They are trying to shut down human commercial operators, I said. But the route network I have built, the contacts I have made, those are not just human. Sis is Dravathi. Cray is Dravathi. Arlen is Veth. The colonies I have delivered to include 6 different Tier 3 species. I paused. The reclassification motion affects human operators specifically. But the consequences would affect every Tier 3 operator who has been working with us. They have a stake in the outcome, Meridian said. Yes, I said. They have a stake. And the Federation Council has Tier 3 representatives. Not many, not powerful ones. But the Federation Charter gives every member species, even Tier 3, the right to petition the Council. A petition requires signatures, Meridian said. A petition sufficient to force debate on a motion requires signatures from 6 member species. How many Tier 3 species are there? I asked. 14 currently active in Federation membership, Meridian said. And how many of them, I said, do you think would be willing to petition against a motion that explicitly codes Tier 3 commercial operators as second-tier citizens permanently? Meridian was quiet. Then it said, you are going to spend the next 12 days making a great many calls. Yes, I said. I am. I made the calls. I made all of them. The vote was scheduled for 10 in the morning, Federation Standard, in the Council chambers on Concordia Station. I was not in the chambers. I was on the Meridian, which was docked at Concordia's outer ring, which was the closest a Tier 3 registered vessel could dock under current regulations. Peter Aldridge was in the chambers. He had been there since 7 in the morning. Iris Cole was there. 14 Tier 3 species representatives, not all of them, but 14 out of a possible 17, had filed formal petition documents in the preceding 4 days. The petition had been accepted by the Council's administrative office under exactly the provision of the Federation Charter that Meridian had identified. 6 member species requesting formal debate on a motion pending vote. The Compact had not seen it coming. I could tell because when the petitions were filed on day 3 of my 12, the administrative delays on our route filings stopped overnight. Someone in the Compact had decided that creating more documentation of interference was no longer wise. I sat in the cockpit with Owen and Clara and watched the transmitted feed from the Council chambers. It was not dramatic in the way stories usually are. It was a political proceeding, and political proceedings are full of language and procedure and points of order and responses to points of order. The Compact's lead council member, a senior Valorian with a long political record and a careful, measured speaking style, presented the motion in formal terms, framing it as exactly what it was not: a modernization effort, a quality assurance measure, a neutral regulatory adjustment. Then the Tier 3 petition was presented by the Dravathi representative. She was the oldest member of the Tier 3 delegation, and she spoke for 11 minutes without notes. She spoke about the Veth minor delivery. She had not asked me for permission to include it. She had heard about it from someone at the colony, and it had found its way into her remarks. She spoke about the Veth hauler networks, and the Dravathi pilot network, and the quiet pattern of interconnected small operators who had built something practical and real in the space the established carriers had not bothered to fill. She spoke about what it means to be told, formally and by law, that your kind of people does not belong in the spaces where the real work happens. The chamber was quiet when she finished. 3 council members who had been expected to vote for the Compact motion filed abstentions. 2 filed votes against. The motion failed by 2 votes. Owen made a sound I had never heard from him before. It was the kind of sound that happens when something a person has been quietly bracing for does not happen, and the body does not know what to do with the relief. Clara said, very calmly, noted in the log. I looked at the chamber feed and thought about the Dravathi representative standing at the speaker's podium. I thought about the older woman on Veth Minor, and the word in her language, for a heart that works correctly. Meridian said, Marcus. Yes, I said. The petition being submitted required signatures from 6 member species. You gathered 14. Yes, I said. The motion failed by 2 votes. Yes. You gathered considerably more support than was strictly necessary. I did not know in advance which of it would matter, I said. So I gathered all of it. Meridian was quiet for a moment. The compact will not stop, it said. I know, I said. This was a significant loss for them. They will regroup. I know that too, I said. You are not concerned. I am extremely concerned, I said. I am also aware that concern is not the same as stopped. I was 31 years old. I had spent 16 years getting to this point, and this point was not the end of anything. It was, if anything, the moment when things became more serious, because the compact now knew that we were not going to go quietly, and we knew that they were not going to stop trying. But something had changed. Something real and significant and hard to undo. 20 minutes after the vote, a message arrived from the council's formal records office. It was addressed to the Meridian's registry, which meant it was addressed to me and to Meridian jointly, under our dual designation. It was not long. It informed us that, following the defeat of the reclassification motion and in recognition of the treaty rights exercised during the petition process, the Federation Council's membership committee had opened a formal review of humanity's species classification. The review would assess whether humanity should be elevated from Tier 3 to Tier 2 status. Tier 2 meant full commercial lane access. Tier 2 meant equal certification standards. Tier 2 meant a seat at the table. I read the message twice. Clara read it over my shoulder and made a small, sharp sound that she immediately smoothed over into professional calm. Owen read it and did not say anything, but he put one hand briefly on my shoulder and then went back to his station. I looked out the viewport at the stars. Meridian said, "This is what you were working toward." "I was working toward keeping our contracts," I said. "No," Meridian said. "You were working toward this. You have been working toward this since Veth Minor. Since the first compact patrol told you to stay in your lane. Since the day in Bay 47 when you sat down in front of me and said you were going to get your money's worth." I thought about that. "I didn't know it then," I said. "I did," Meridian said. "I have watched a great many species navigate the galaxy. They all choose their lanes eventually. They find the route that works, and they follow it, because following it is stable and safe, and the known is always less frightening than the unknown." A pause. "You kept looking at the lanes you were told you could not enter, and asking why." "Because the reasons were not good enough," I said. "Yes," it said. "That is the thing about your species, Marcus. The reasons are never quite good enough. Every other species I have known accepts the map eventually. You keep drawing new ones." I sent a message to Peter Aldridge, who was still in the chamber. I told him to begin reviewing the classification criteria so we would be ready when the review officially opened. I sent a message to Iris Cole. She responded in 40 seconds with a list of things to do that was approximately 2 pages long. She had prepared it in advance. She had known. I sent a message to Sis and Arlen and Cray and everyone else in the network. We won the motion. The review is open. More soon. And then I leaned back in the pilot's seat of the ship I had bought for 50 cents 16 years ago, and I watched the stars through the viewport, and I let myself, for just a few minutes, feel the full weight of what had been built. Not just the ship, not just the network, not just the political outcome, all of it together. The work that starts before you know what it is building, the decisions made in the dark when nobody is watching, the stubbornness that carries you through the years when it would be so much easier to stop. Meridian said, after a while.
"You are quiet."
"I'm thinking," I said. "About what?" "About Bay 47, I said. "About Gerald with his stamp. About the gap between the fuel compressors where I slept the first 2 nights." "Are you nostalgic?" "No," I said. "I'm grateful. There's a difference." We undocked from Concordia's outer ring the next morning and set course for our next delivery. There was cargo waiting, and a client who needed reliability, and a route that was not as difficult as it used to be, because what had been difficult was changing. The galaxy was changing. Not all at once, not in ways that would be visible to anyone looking casually, but at the edges, in the spaces between the established lanes, in the quiet network of small operators and Tier 3 colonists, and one alien intelligence who had been waiting 63 years to be useful. Something was different. Something had started that was not going to stop. The review took 8 months. That was faster than anyone expected, which Peter Aldridge said later was partly a reflection of the political climate after the failed reclassification motion, and partly a reflection of the documentation we had prepared. We did not go into the review without preparation. We went in with 16 years of delivery records, 7 years of network activity logs, the VETH minor humanitarian filing and all subsequent documentation, and a legal argument that Peter and his team had been quietly developing for 4 months before the review officially opened. The compact did not stop opposing us during those 8 months, but they had learned from the motion failure, and what they had learned was that open opposition created records, so they did not oppose us openly. They did not push another regulatory action. What they did instead was quiet and technical, a series of interspecies trade framework discussions, in which the compact's representatives kept introducing language that would effectively achieve what the reclassification motion had been designed to achieve, buried inside larger treaty updates that were legitimately about other things. Clara found every one of them. She had developed, by this point, an ability to read regulatory documents that bordered on preternatural. She would sit in the cockpit with a datapad and work her way through hundreds of pages of Federation trade code and flag the 3 sentences that mattered in a way that, before she explained it, would have looked to anyone else like standard boilerplate. I asked her once how she did it. She said, "Every document has a center of gravity. The language around the thing they care about most is always slightly different, more specific, more deliberate. If you know what they want, you can find where they put it." Peter's team matched Clara's flags with legal responses, each submitted to the relevant body before the language could be incorporated into a final text. The compact's technical approach produced exactly the kind of record they had been trying to avoid, a clear, documented pattern of attempts to restrict human commercial operations through embedded regulatory language. Peter said, "When we had the 7th of these documented, this is actually better than winning a vote." "How?" I asked. "A vote is a moment," he said. "Documentation is permanent. What we have now is a record that will exist in Federation archives regardless of what happens in any future vote. It establishes a pattern. Patterns, once established in Federation law, are very difficult to argue against." The review board had 7 members, 2 appointed by the Federation Council, 2 by the Tier 2 Classification Committee, 1 from the Tier 3 Advocacy Group, 1 independent legal expert, and 1 from the Federation's Historical Species Development Commission. It was the last one I was most interested in. The Historical Commission member was a Keth academic named Eld, very old, with the same geological quality I had seen in Voss. Eld had asked to see the meridian before the formal hearings began. The request came through official channels but felt personal. We let the request through official channels and met Eld at Concordia's outer ring, where we were now docked. Eld came aboard alone. She walked through the ship in a way that was not an inspection. She had seen the technical documentation. She was not checking systems. She was looking at the ship itself, at what it was, at what had been done to it. She spent a long time in the engine room. She spent a long time in what had been the empty cargo bay, which now had 3 workstations along one wall and a supply rack along another, and the accumulated small marks of years of use. She ran one hand along the wall in a way that reminded me of how Meridian sometimes described sensing the ship around itself. Then she went to the cockpit and she stood in front of Meridian's housing. Meridian said, "Eld." Eld said, "Unyielding Meridian, I read your registration record. You were built 412 years ago." "Yes," Meridian said. "I knew the engineer who designed your cognitive architecture," Eld said. "She died 200 years ago. She would have been very pleased to know you were still here." "I was not sure I would be," Meridian said, "for a long time." Eld looked at the housing for a moment. Then she looked at me. "Captain Vane, what was this ship when you found it?" "Scrap," I said. "And what did you see when you looked at scrap?" I thought about being 15 and cold and holding a paper with a stamp on it. "Something that wasn't finished yet," I said. Eld nodded slowly. She looked around the cockpit. At the repaired panels, the replaced screens, the instrumentation that was a combination of Keth original and human modification, and components from 4 other species, held together with engineering logic that had been described, by more than one expert, as things that should not work but did. "My species built this ship," she said quietly. "We built it well, because we build everything well, and then we let it go. the way we let many things go, because we had moved on to the next thought, the next project, the next idea. We are very good at building. We are less good at staying with what we build. She looked at me. You are good at staying, she said. The formal hearings ran 3 days. They were recorded, archived, public record. I testified for 4 hours on the second day. I was not nervous. I had spent 16 years preparing for things more immediately threatening than a hearing room. I answered every question directly and fully, and when I was asked to address the compact's documented attempts to restrict human commercial access through embedded regulatory language, I addressed them directly and fully. The compact's representative on the review board, an observer only, no voting rights, but present, looked at me across the hearing chamber with an expression I could not fully read. Not hostile exactly, something more complicated, something that might have been reassessment. The vote was 7-0. 7-0, not a close thing, not a political compromise, a unanimous finding that humanity's commercial development record, the network I had built, the treaty adherence documented over 16 years, and the demonstrated capacity for complex multi-species cooperation, all met and exceeded the criteria for Tier 2 classification. The classification was effective immediately. Peter Aldridge's message to me when the result came in was 3 words. Well done, Captain. Iris Cole's message was 2 pages long and began immediately planning the expanded contract operations that Tier 2 access would allow. Voss sent a message from wherever he was currently working, which I did not know because Voss moved frequently and told nobody in advance. It said, I added something to my notebook today. It says, the result of humans treating the unknown as a delay rather than a boundary. Signed, one who observed. That was all. The Dravathi representative who had spoken at the council sent a message that contained, at the end, the word she had told me meant a heart that works correctly. Just the word, nothing else. I kept it. That evening I sat in the cockpit of the Meridian and looked at the stars through the viewport and felt the particular quality of silence that exists after a long effort completes. I thought about my stepfather, who I had not spoken to in 16 years. I had heard through a circuitous route, the way information from the past finds you sometimes, without your looking for it, that he was still on Callisto Station, working a mid-level administrative position in a logistics operation that ran on routing software developed by a human company. He had sent me a message 2 years ago, a brief one, that said something about having heard about my work and hoping I was well. I had sent him a crate of good food and no other response. Not out of bitterness. I had spent enough years moving forward that bitterness had been left somewhere a long way back. But because I did not have anything to say to him that was not contained in what I had done. He had looked at a 15-year-old and seen something he wanted to be rid of. I had looked at a broken ship for 50 cents and seen something worth staying for. The crate of food was as generous as I could be about the difference, and I had been. Owen came to the cockpit and sat in the navigator's seat, which was technically Clara's station but which Owen had always claimed for the evenings. He said, "You're quiet." "I'm thinking," I said. "You've been thinking for about 3 hours," he said. "It's a lot to think about," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Owen had a particular quality that I had come to value deeply over the years. He did not fill silence with noise. He sat with it. He had been doing that since the first day he came to Bay 47 and asked for work in exchange for food, and became, over the years that followed, the most reliable person I had ever known. "Do you remember," he said after a while, "when you first flew her out of the bay?" "Yes," I said. "You didn't say anything when we came back," he said. "I always wondered what you were thinking." I thought back. "I was thinking about the next step," I said. "The drive core. How much it cost, and how far away that amount seemed." "Right," he said. "You were thinking about what needed doing next." "Yes," I said. He nodded slightly. "And now?" he asked. I looked at the stars. "The same thing," I said. He smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that knows something. "Of course," he said. Clara appeared in the doorway. She had her data pad, which she almost always had. "Iris has already sent 3 new contract proposals," she said. "2 of them are routes that we technically had access to before, but that nobody offered us. Tier 2 changes a lot of what gets offered." I know, I said. How do you want to handle the intake? She asked. The same way we handle everything, I said. Look at what they need. Look at what we can do, and figure out the gap between them. She made a note. She was used to this. The gap between what was needed and what was currently being done was where I lived. It had always been where I lived. Meridian said, Marcus. Yes, I said. I have been thinking about what Eld said. About the Keth being good at building but less good at staying. I remember, I said. I have been operational for 412 years, Meridian said. In all of that time, no entity has ever remained with me long enough for me to know them fully. I know you fully. I know Owen. I know Clara. I know this crew in a way I have never known any crew in 4 centuries of carrying them. I did not say anything. I just listened. The Federation is about to be different because of what you have done, Meridian said. The record exists. The pattern exists. Tier 3 species have seen that the pattern is changeable. That is significant in ways that will continue after this conversation. Yes, I said, probably. But what I want to say is this, Meridian continued. You came into this bay as a 15-year-old human with a crumpled paper and 11 credits, and you decided the ship was yours. You decided I was yours to restore. You decided the galaxy's rules about where you were allowed to be were worth questioning. You did all of this without knowing where it would go. A pause. I have thought, for the past 16 years, about why you stayed. I have concluded that the answer is not complicated. You stayed because the ship needed someone to stay. And you are, fundamentally, the kind of person who stays. I looked at the amber light pulsing slowly in its housing on the rear wall. Steady, warm, alive. So are you, I said. The light pulsed once, slow and deep. Yes, Meridian said quietly. Yes, I suppose I am. We left Concordia Station the next morning. There was a cargo contract, a delivery of specialized agricultural equipment to a colony in a system we had not been to before, accessible now under Tier 2 lane clearance, paying well because it required technical knowledge and precise routing that the bigger carriers found time-consuming. It was the kind of contract that, 2 years ago, we could not have taken. It was exactly the kind of contract that we were built to do. The Meridian moved out of dock with the smooth authority of a ship that had been carefully maintained and continuously improved over years. She was not the ship she had been in Bay 47. She was not the ship she had been when she first flew. She had been added to, repaired, improved, reconfigured, and rebuilt in small ways and large ones, and she was better than she had ever been in her 400-year life. We cleared the station's outer marker, and the stars opened up ahead of us. I thought about a girl I had seen, the last time I passed through Callisto Station 6 months before, a Dravathi girl, young, standing outside one of the derelict bays in Ring 9, with the particular quality of attention that I recognized because I had worn it myself. She was looking at a broken ship the way I had once looked at the Meridian, like it was something not yet finished. I had gone to the Bay Authority office. Gerald was long retired. There was a new clerk, young and efficient, who processed my request without comment. Then I had gone back to the corridor and waited for the girl to still be there, which she was. She had looked up at me with large, dark eyes that held more than their share of uncertainty and determination in equal measure. I held out the coin. She looked at it. "Half a credit," I said. "That's all it costs to start." She took it. She looked at the ship. She looked at the coin. She looked at me, and whatever she saw in my face did not frighten her. It did the other thing, the better thing. It confirmed something she had already decided. She turned back to the ship. She was already thinking about what needed doing first. I walked away and did not look back, because she did not need me to. She had what she needed, the same thing I had needed, at the same age, in the same corridor, looking at the same kind of impossible thing, with the same absolute refusal to believe it was actually impossible. We all started somewhere. The ones who made something of it were not the ones who had the best start, or the most resources, or the smoothest path. They were the ones who stayed when it would have been easier to leave, who fixed what was broken, who asked why the rule existed before they accepted it. The Meridian jumped to hyperspace, and the stars became light, and we went forward. There was always something that needed doing next. That was enough. It had always been enough. It always would be.